everyone. We're gonna begin, and welcome to Same Game and Different Sound. If your phone is not muted, please mute it. This panel's idea is basically it's a composer panel with an interesting switch. We were all given a gameplay video that we found, and we each composed the video in different style. So we're gonna show what we did, talk about the differences and how different music and sound can impact the game. A bit of a sad news, Inon couldn't make it. He had surgery and he's fine, everything is fine, but his doctors ordered him to stay home. But he sent his video and we'll see him talking about it in a video. Guys, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Why don't you go ahead, introduce yourself, and say your favorite game audio moment.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
something you remember from.
Okay. Becky Allen, I'm audio director at PopCap Games, and my favorite moment is in Peggle. The Peggle moment where, you know, everything goes da-da-da-da-da. Hallelujah. That's my favorite moment. It still is my favorite moment, sorry.
That was, does it really do that? Because that was really good.
Yeah, it really does.
Nice.
So, I mean, you know, professional singers.
Hey everybody, my name is Jason Graves. I'm a composer, independent composer. So my favorite. So the most memorable moment for me with music and games was before I started getting into writing music for games at all. I played the very first Medal of Honor that had Michael Giacchino scoring it. And the reason it's so memorable is that's the first time I'd heard like a live orchestra playing music in a game. And I'm not a gamer, I'll admit that. So I have very few game experiences, but that one really stuck with me. And I thought, man, I want to do something like that with, it was very emotional. And even though it wasn't that interactive, like just the way the music would play, even if I wasn't doing anything, the music would start getting more tense. And I'd start feeling myself like tensing up, even if I was just walking on a beach or something. I really loved the relationship of the music to the player's mood, and that's always kind of stuck with me from the very beginning.
Oh, were you a musician at the time? Like, were you already doing music? Or?
Yeah, I think I had done like maybe one or two really small independent games, but it was all with MIDI. And the fact that they used live orchestra, I mean, Steven Spielberg obviously had a lot to do with that, but that they had live orchestra and that could be accomplished within a game was sort of a meaningful moment for me.
Oh. All right. I'm Arnold Nesis. I've been composing for games for about 7 years, and 2 years ago I started my own company, and we're turning music albums to video games. So it's like a very interactive video clip, but which is as interactive as a game. Right, so the idea of the panel, as I said before, we chose a pretty random clip on YouTube from an indie game which is called Bright Memory. I think none of us knows anything about it, including myself. So we came to this with fresh eyes. And we just got the video as it is. I'm going to show what we got. And
Can everybody turn off their cell phones, please? Thank you.
Right. So this is the version that we saw. And from the little I know about this game, it looks amazing. As far as I can tell, it is being developed by one guy.
Really?
It's indie. Yeah, it's totally indie.
Are you here?
Like the YouTube description actually says like Bright Memory Indie FPS. And I think it's pretty awesome.
Mute the cow, please.
It feels so much longer when you watch it without sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I was surprised how quickly it was over when it had the music.
Yeah. Right, and once we had that, we basically, the original clip had music and sound. We took it out and we rebuilt everything from scratch. So the sound design was done by two great guys, Joe Marchuk and Oscar Cohen. They are, well, Joe describes himself as a technical sound designer made of real human meat. And, and Oscar describes himself as a sound designer who enjoys making laser guns out of beer cans. They're both students in Berklee College of Music, and they were kind enough to volunteer and do the sound. And this is how the video looked after we had the sound in. And then we stepped in and started doing the music. So we're just going to show the different versions and discuss them before we show them. As I said, Inon couldn't make it, so he goes first as a punishment. But he did send a video of himself talking about it and his considerations and asked us to show it.
Hi everybody, I'm here in my studio and not with you, and that's quite an unfortunate turn of events, but I had to go through a surgery, nothing really serious, but my doctors totally ordered me to stay and to rest for about 2 weeks. After that, hopefully I'll get back and play basketball. Meanwhile, I'm here in my studio and welcome you to the amazing panel that these great composers put together. And now to talk a little bit about my music for this cue. Basically, the way I was looking at it, I had to create something that is frantic on one hand, but on the other hand, I had to create something that will be basically going over all the sound effects. And what I found out that actually sometimes slow melodies, they do the job much better than fast melodies. I also found out that lower drum beats sometimes work a little bit better than all the higher drum beats and the drum sounds because all the sound effects and the shots are sort of like in a more high range. So basically, I have chosen this kind of palette. There are basically the synth palette that is giving us sort of like the bottom and the frantic part, and this is basically the triplets. So this is basically going underneath. Then there are some effects, orchestral effects, that I found out extremely powerful when it comes to this kind of scene, because they are frantic, but also they stand out pretty good. So we can hear. And this is basically bowed instruments that are playing in a non-traditional way. And then I definitely put together some sort of like assortment of percussions. But again, these are pretty low and not very basically busy. And here they are. So basically they're giving just the bottom and the rhythm, but they're not occupying too much space, because that could be a problem. And lastly, there is a melody, and the melody is being played by low brass. And the reason why I did it was because, again, all the sound effects are sort of like on the higher range, so this low melody and slow melody definitely standing out pretty good with all the sound effects without getting in the way. And you could hear the melody here. Very basic, ominous, but it does the job. We know that we are in sort of like a very stressed situation. So we would like actually to give the ominous part to the melodic. And this is also something, melody is always good to bring from time to time, because then you could just hang on to something, you could remember something. And here is all together. So you could hear the bottom part, and here's the brass. Strings are playing the triplets up there, but they're not playing all the time. So they're giving us sort of like the excitement, but they're not playing all the time, so they're not occupying all the area. And this is pretty much it. I wish everybody else lots of luck, and hopefully I could see all of you next time on both of my feet and running and jumping like always. See you later.
Yeah, I forgot to talk about Inon at the beginning, but Inon is actually, I'm pretty sure everyone knows him. He's one of the top composers in the industry. He did things like Fallout and Dragon Age, and he's awesome. And he's an Israeli brother, so yeah. Right, so this is how his final version sounds. Right, Jason.
Is it? I have to follow Inon?
Thank you.
So walk us through the process. What did you think about the video? How did you approach it?
Well, first of all, I thought it was genius that literally none of us knew anything about the game, what it was called. There was no direction for music whatsoever, and we were really allowed to sort of do our own thing. So how many composers are in the audience with a show of hands?
Oh, wow.
Yes.
All right, and then how many non-composers with a show of hands?
Yes.
All right, what about audio directors? Yeah, isn't that all right? There's some audio directors out there. You know what really struck me about Inon's points is he talked a lot about the mix, and when it comes down to it, when you're dealing with a shooter, which so many of these games have wall-to-wall music with them, it is a big point of contention between the music and the sound effects, and the easiest way to fix that and the hardest way to fix it is to know what the sound effects are going to be before you do the music. A lot of times the music's running concurrently with gameplay and the sound effects might be done after the music. Now, I've worked with some audio directors that will actually figure out what key the music's going to be in, because I'll have it in the description of the file, and they'll purposely pitch the sound effects to be in the same key as the music so that it's sort of a more harmonious balance. But if you don't have a choice, a lot of times what I end up doing is just know or expect that there's going to be gunfire and explosions and swords. So you've got these sort of two lower mid-range and upper mid-range kind of telephone frequencies that you know is going to be occupying space before the music even comes in. So I basically approach this like every other project I've gotten in probably the last 5 or 7 years, which is a developer comes to me and says, and it really is this every time, we want a completely original score that doesn't sound like anything anyone else has ever done before. And we want to be able to hear like 5 or 10 seconds of the main theme or of an action cue, and for people to recognize immediately that that's a cue from our game.
Okay.
You know, think something really, really identifiable, like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
But make it unique.
I mean, it's sort of, it's a really tall order. But what I love about that is they're already thinking outside the box in terms of instruments and sounds. So with this one, I pretended like they did that as well. And not knowing what anybody else was doing, I thought, well, probably what the, you know, sort of, and this is nothing against what anyone else has done for their music. I mean, I heard Enon's,
We haven't heard each other's work.
yeah, we don't have any clue.
Today.
I'm the only one who has.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Or after you wrote yours.
After. Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, what would be expected from a track like this would be you'd have like maybe some big drums and like the big low brass and maybe a choir in the background or something, and kind of lots of, you know, energy in the track. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to do any of that for this. I'm going to do like what could be furthest from orchestra and choir and big drums. So I basically scored it with electric guitars and drum machines, with the idea that I saw with the enemies, they sort of look kind of native and low tech, and you've got all this cool whatever with your samurai sword and your guns, and you can fly. So I thought maybe that would be a nice contrast, kind of you're highlighting the technology with the music that you're using as a player. And then that way, I've sort of already, the palette of sounds, if I'm just doing electric guitar and drum machines, is going to be fairly different from maybe what another composer might work on. So then the developer is kind of getting their wish. So how many minutes do I have? Because I've got a couple of things, and I might want to watch the video twice. Okay. Why don't we play the version with the sound effects, and then I'll talk a little bit. So one of the things that I was really thinking of when I scored it was I was pretending like, oh, thanks, yeah. We'll watch it again, and you can clap then if you want to. I was treating it like I was also doing the implementation for the music, and that's what I've done for the last couple of titles that I'm still working on. I've been doing the implementation as well. I kind of took my own advice, because a lot of people say when I'm starting out in games, what should I do if I want to write music? I was like, well, you need to learn how to implement it. Then you're sort of creating your own job in a way. If someone needs sound effects implemented, that's a different talk. But it really made me think about this video differently, because when I first watched it, I never listened to the sound effects until I emailed you and said, like, I don't think I have the sound effects. And then I just stuck
Oh, and
them.
you already had the music done?
Yeah, I didn't
wow.
listen to the sound effects before I did the music, because normally I don't get to hear them, and it's just, I was trying to keep it real, man. So what I thought was I would do something maybe with a kick drum, and it would give it a little bit of momentum, and I'd put it in 7, because that would kind of make it feel like a little hiccupy, but still sort of empowering. I didn't want to do anything that sounded scary or was too ominous or anything like that. I like the idea of the music making you feel more powerful as a player and kind of urging you on. But I broke it up into 60 seconds. I sort of pretended like this was more like 20 minutes of gameplay, and I broke it up into like 8 different sections, which go by super fast. But it's more for the point of illustration than anything else. So the guitars are really what is maintaining the energy, and there's a little hi-hat in the background just going tick, 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 and that's really it. Everything else is electric guitars. So from an interactive standpoint, I pretended like we were still in an explore state before the video started, and we're going to do another example once I finish talking about this that just has the music, so you can hear it a little bit better. But there's a like reversed drone guitar thing that kind of sounds like a pad, so that was kind of in your explore state. And then 2 seconds in, the camera kind of pans to the right and you see some of the enemies, and that's sort of like an enemy spotted trigger, and that would add in another layer of music that kind of made it getting ready for combat. That's when the hi-hat comes in. That's all that comes in, it's just the hi-hat. So if you walk away from them, or if you don't engage them maybe for 20 seconds, it's just sort of ticking along, and it can, you know, it can loop or bring in different layers and act on its own. And then at 8 seconds, I think maybe you jump first, or no, you do your force push thing on the enemies. So I kind of considered that like engaging the enemy, and that's when the other guitars came in. So the piece of music, action music, kind of starts in earnest there, and you can feel it step up, but it's still the same number of layers and the same piece that has that ambient music bed underneath it. So this stuff is systematically stacking up, kind of like a sandwich. And at 30 seconds, there's a slow motion thing that happens, and I don't know what the gameplay reason is for that, but it seemed like an important sort of moment. Maybe you're using a cool effect or something. But also it limited the enemies back down to maybe 2. There were only like 2 enemies left, so I considered that, what did I put? Only 2 enemies left. Thin out music, but keep persistent pulse. So the drum machine and the hi-hat and everything that was sort of defining the combat music, I like to use air quotes, I can't help it.
Nice.
Defining the combat music, that goes away, and I had a little like kind of a fuzzy wah-wah sort of guitar sound that came in and kind of picked up the momentum from the drum machines, but it didn't really sound as combat-y. In the music, you'll be able to tell it just gets really clear, all the low end drops out, and I was thinking of focus. Like you've got 2 people left, it's not as stressful, you know, just get these 2 guys down and then you're free and clear. And then once all the enemies are gone, it's like the next stage in the gameplay. I've always been a huge fan of forward motion with music. So if you're in combat for 30 seconds or for 5 minutes, and then it's a defining point where combat's over and you're moving on, I want the music to change. I want you to have that reward. I did this one game based on a film a long time ago called Flushed Away. It was about rats scurrying around. But I was so excited. It was one of the first games that I'd worked on, and I got to talk to like Harry Gregson Williams, and he was doing the film score, and I was really, really pumped. And I'm only talking about this because it does have reference, but we've got a little more time since. So I'm making up for Inon. I'll just, you know. So I did this music, but they only had maybe 20 or 25 minutes in the music budget. It was very, very low budget, and I think I wrote probably double that because I always write more music than is needed. But even then, I felt like maybe it wasn't enough, and it was one of the first games I was able to play and hear my music in it. So I played for maybe the 5 minutes on level 1, walking around the kitchen, and you get all these unlockable things, and you collect some stuff, and then there's an obvious point where you move on to the next room. And I was like, sweet. I had no idea where the music was going to go. It was very much like, we need 5 exploration cues and 5 cues based on this. None of it was based on gameplay. So I was experiencing the music for the first time. After 5 minutes, I get into the next room, and the same piece of music starts playing again. And it was such, I just kind of like melted in my chair. I was like, really? I mean, and so I went through and I played it, and then the next room, the same piece of music. And it's like a 60-second loop, and it just played and played. So I've sort of been obsessive about not having that happen again. No matter what, like I'm going to make sure.
Ever.
Like we're forward movement. So that's why I did a key change. It's about 40 seconds in. When all the enemies are gone, I did a very obvious key change, like down a minor third or something, so it feels completely fresh. And in my head, that's sort of like you're back to explore mode, but there's danger. So it's not going back to the just quiet pad with ambient sounds. It's still got pulse going on, and it's still in 7, so it's automatically sort of giving you that momentum. Still in combat mode, energy high. Oh, and then the second big slow motion thing was the dragon flying by, which was so awesome. I figured if the video slowed down right there for the gameplay, that maybe that would be a good place to emphasize something as well. So there's like a stinger there, basically, that just kind of, the music slows down briefly while the dragon's flying by. And then at the very end, it just sort of stops, but I pretended like maybe you had just finished that chapter or that point, and something came up that said, like, great job, we're moving on, and I put a stinger on it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got seven things in there that really, I can't help it now because I've been composing knowing that I'm implementing this music myself in these other games, so I couldn't help but put the music for this demo together that same sort of way, and I really did it that way. There's not a lot going on. It's maybe 3 guitar tracks and the drum machine track, and then some of the stingers are like some swooshes or hits or something. But I love the idea of lean and mean and having the music be really nimble, like a musical ninja, kind of jumping around, and you're not committing yourself to these big, long 30 or 60-second loops where if you want to kind of come back around to the beginning, it sort of feels like you're starting over again. It was more about keeping it changing as much as possible. And I thought the reverse guitar thing at the end was kind of a cool alien, kind of sounded a little foreign, sounded a little familiar but different. Yeah.
Awesome. So if the developer would approach you and say like, hey, this is my game, what do I do with music? You would tell them to go adapt it, right?
If it's a game like that, I would say yes.
This game, like he approaches you and says,
Yeah.
This is a short video, what should I do with music?
Absolutely, yeah,
Adaptive, right?
adaptive. And a lot of times even I will write, let's say that this was going to be, normally I'd do maybe a 5-minute piece of music that would be, combat track 1 or something like that. And it would have the ambient layers and kind of the middle of the road layers and the key changes in it, probably every 30 seconds, because I like to have a very short attention span. Every 30 seconds, something's changing. And I've been doing this a lot lately. I'll write a 5 or 8 minute suite, and then I end up implementing that as adaptive music. But there are all these kind of 30 to 45 second points where there's definite changes, and they're kind of built-in loop points. And within those 30 or 45 second loop points, I'll have doubled up on certain things. Like if it's this track, I would probably have 3 drum machine tracks maybe. One's got the kick drum, one's got the hi-hat, maybe another sort of mid-level thing, and then I'll do that again times 3, but none of them would ever play at the same time. They'd be kind of taking one and then this one and then that one goes in, and they'd randomly go in and out when the loop occurs. So it doesn't really sound like a loop, it just sounds like you're going to the next section. And that's all very kind of heady and abstract sort of ways to explain it, but it is cool. I mean, Fmod and Wise are free to download, and there's tutorials online, and there's videos, and it's one of those things, if you start working with it, especially earlier in your career, I did it very late in mine, But I just realized you start learning how to do it, and it kind of becomes ingrained in your psyche. And when you're writing, you can't help but think about how it's going to be implemented. And I think that, I mean, it can't be a bad thing.
Becky, before we continue, like, would you agree with the adaptive?
Absolutely. And I think that once you're implementing, which I highly suggest to all composers, it helps you write differently because you're thinking about the game, you're thinking about gameplay, you're thinking about different emotional states, no matter where you started or how you're educated, it will affect how you write your cues. So I think everyone here should go home and learn WISE or FMOD. If you don't know it already, even if you're freelance or you think that's your path, it's something that I think we need to move forward with in the industry, as composers in particular, because I know that there are a lot of composers that don't do that, but I think it really does change how you compose. It betters the game and the audio experience. So, yes, I agree.
It's not just about interactivity either. It's about avoiding repetition, because let's face it, repetition is like the death of game music. I mean, that's the worst thing in the world. So you can have one piece of music, maybe it's looped for 5 minutes and it's only maybe not 30 seconds long, but it's played like 5 or 6 times in the loop. But if you know how to implement and then you're thinking about that from a composition standpoint, I've just hit play and walked away, and I've let something go for 20 minutes, and I never felt like, oh, yeah, here we go again. It's constantly recycling. There's all this randomness and effects and things you can have, like more enemies. I'm going to increase the distortion in WISE on my drum track because there's more enemies, and that's actually happening outside of anything that you've written. That's happening in real time in the engine.
And those kind of choices that you make within WISE or FMOD are compositional choices. Those are creative choices. So if you're just handing off your tracks, you're missing out on all of this creativity. And I think, personally, I find that a very exciting place to work. So
if you need to describe the feeling you were trying to support in the video in 1 word or 2 words, what would it be? Like the main empowerment.
Empowerment,
With the air quotes.
With the air quotes,
yes.
All right, awesome. Cool. So,
wait, play. You could just play it without the sound effects.
Oh, we didn't. Right. Sorry.
Music only.
Yeah, music only. And just think about these key points, like the 6 or 7 points that I was talking about. You'll hear the music change.
Right. Now I need to follow that. This is going to be fun. Right. So for me, this was a bit of a weird video because it kind of went against every instinct I usually have. So the first panel I ever did as a composer's panel, we were talking about adaptive music, and I was the first one to answer the question. So the guy who was moderating asked, like, what are your thoughts about adaptive? And I said, like, it's kind of a bit like a rush to the goal, you know, where a lot of developers want to go that way, but not all games need it. And I was kind of, and then it turned out that the other guy on the panel had his own, like, adaptive software company. So it became like a whole argument about adaptive. And usually I wouldn't say that I'm not a big fan, but I'm very careful with adaptive. Like I ask myself and the developer a lot of times before I go adaptive, does this game really need it? Because like, I don't know, a story-driven Telltale game usually can do without. And there is a downside to adaptive, at least the way I feel, is that there is much less control of the music. You know what I mean? It's like, it creates a whole new way of composing and a whole new way of listening to music and creating music, which doesn't exist anywhere outside of video games. But you don't always even know how it's going to sound, right? You're not sure when the motive is going to come in. You're not sure, like, you're kind of releasing it out there, and it's always a really scary moment for me where you go like, this is the adaptive music. Please be good. Then you're playing the build for the first time, and usually it's cool, but it's a very scary moment for me. But at the same time that I was working with this, I also teach a composing course in Israel, and we were talking about adaptive, and then I saw this video and I thought like this is the one moment I would definitely go adaptive. This is exactly the game where this needs to happen. And the second thing is that usually I'm on the side of supporting the story first of all and the feeling, and like always asking the developer what do you want, or the game designer, probably the more correct person, like what do you want the player to feel at the same time, right? Because and here I was like, all right, so there is like guns and swords and zombies or whatever they are, and the dragon, and we're walking, and it kind of felt like this whole salad of things that someone mostly wanted it to look cool. Like it's done really, really well, but I feel it's like a bit over the limit, you know what I mean? Like it's like, let's take every cool element that has ever been tried in a video game and pull them all together and make a whole thing out of it. So I kind of went with the extreme for my version. So I was kind of thinking, okay, I should take like not the most expected genres here, and they have to be cool, and they have to be like, you said that they need, like you wanted the guitar at the end to feel different. So I was kind of thinking maybe something Oriental, or not the totally Western sound, and adaptive. So yeah, and I was kind of thinking what Elias can do. We talked about Fmod and WIs, but at my course we were talking at Elias at the same time. So I was thinking like I'm gonna look what Elias can do and try to build something that will work to show the students as well. And yeah, so I'm warning this went a bit extreme, but. So yeah, this is also, like you said, pretty much the same like sync points. You have the exploration at the beginning where you're walking and not much happens, and then you see the enemy, so the music becomes more intense. The dragon obviously is a sync point that I think all of us like used. And also there was this moment where everything becomes pink that I kind of felt it's the power-up or something, so I thought of that as a bit of a different layer. And yeah. All right, Becky.
Yeah. You have mine there too? Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I'll just confess I wasn't paying attention when we chose the clip. And so it was interesting when I looked at the clip, I'm like, oh, it's action. Okay, awesome.
It's Tom's fault. So originally, Tom's Salto was
it's so a
supposed to
Tom
be here.
choice.
And then he really insisted on picking this video and just went away. He was like, "This is the video."
Thank you,
right.
Tom.
Bye, guys.
So when I paid attention and I looked at the video, I'm like, oh my God, I've never written in this genre. But I'm game. I'm going to do this. Sure. And then I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll do something weird. And non-actiony, although it ended up a little actiony, I have to say. But then I come from CalArts background, so highly experimental. But in the last few years, I've been doing really cute music over at PopCap, and that's been really fun. But I kind of harken back to, I really like shapes. I like sound masses. I like Penderecki, I like Ligeti, and those kinds of things. So I was like, I want sound shapes, so I'm just going to start thinking about that. So I got out, I thought, I need like those kind of extended technique type sounds, and yet at the same time, I'm going to work with what I have. So I had a Spitfire string quartet, I had some other sample libraries, I have a Prophet 12. I'm like, I'm going to use those things. So then I started listening through the sounds to be like, I'm going to also not only think of shape, but I'm going to come from the sound up. So listen to the sounds, see what they might inspire. Because remember, this is not in my wheelhouse, so I don't have like any kind of, not that anybody here has a formula, but I'm like, don't know. So listening to the sounds, choosing the sounds, and thinking about sound shapes. So I found some really cool articulations in the strings, and then I would put it on a track. I was using Pro Tools. I put it on a track, and I would make this just giant blob of black. Okay? Yes. Like that stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Okay, it's kind of like insects. So I'm like, oh yeah, I like that. Okay. And so then I was looking for that kind of stuff, and I put these blobs in different spots that I thought blobs should go. Now, I really do come from a formal training, so it's, it doesn't sound like it at the moment. But I thought, this is good. I'm coming from a place of shape. And then I started thinking about the shape of the video and the different points like you were talking about, and you were talking about as well, like where are the markers of change, right? Because we all do adaptive music of some kind. Like where are those moments where I want to change in the melody or the feel or something like that? So I chose those hand blast type moments, as the shape shifters. And I also emphasized them with some other weird sounds that I found, and added to the sounds that the sound designers made. Sorry, sound designers. And then I had all that going, and I'm like, okay, but this is action, so I'm going to throw in a taiko drum. Woo! Which I did. And I did use low brass. So in the middle section, I'm like, it has shape, but I also want it to, but I'm gonna pay homage to the action cue, and I want it to have a big payoff. Okay, big payoff. So I chose my peak of the cue. I'm like the 3/4 mark in the traditional sense, and then it drifts back. So it's kind of like an A, B, A, again to the shape. So conceptually, coming from ideas of shape and sound and structure, and then also working with the actual sounds that I had, and then I built this thing.
Nice intro.
I love it.
And you say you haven't done action before. That was great.
The dragon is an interesting point because two of us made like, you know, the music go even higher on the dragon, like
Yeah.
Jason and Inon, and the two of us just,
Brought it back
dropped the
down.
music
Yeah,
because I wanted to get, like, I did because I wanted to get this effect of, you know, like,
Right,
like,
yeah.
holy shit.
Me too. I want to feel
and,
different there.
and it's like a trick that actually a lot of like is being used really often, and it's really works well. Like in Lord of the Rings, when Rohan attacks, like there is like the whole main theme, and then the moment the two armies collide, they go like nothing.
Right.
Just,
Like when do you use silence or when do you back off to let something else happen, like a feeling, you know?
yeah. All right, cool. So, what was the original like?
Oh, yeah, that'll be interesting.
Oh, there's a music score to the original?
Yeah.
Cool. Who did that?
I don't know. I've been looking. Yeah, I wanted to apologize about it. Like, I think he's awesome, and I have no idea who he is. So,
If you know who he is, let us know. Or she.
yeah, the developer's name I think is Zheng Xiancheng. I'm pretty sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but I'm not sure where the music is from. It can be stock music, or I tried to find out, but I didn't. They also took the music out of. They also took the music out with the dragon.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because I don't know. To me, it kind of the original felt like a lot of elements that each of us kind of emphasized, and there it's like I don't know, a lot of the things together. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
All right, cool. So let's talk a little. I have two things. I prepared questions, but I don't think we have enough time. We're just gonna let the people ask questions. But one question I thought was interesting in this case is so obviously like it's very different, right? It's seeing the same thing with different music makes you feel really different, and each time I'm doing this panel, I'm really surprised by like how many options there are. You know what I mean? Like I always come in thinking like, with this video, it's gonna sound exactly the same. Everyone are gonna do exactly the same thing, and then I keep getting surprised. So the question is, do you think there is a right answer? Do you think like if you would be the developer, let's say it like that, how, based on what would you choose which is the best? Not like which person, you know, which, let's say you're a developer, you're seeing 4 different videos with different music, yourself is not a musician. Do you just go with your instinct? Do you?
Well, that's the blessing and curse of music, isn't it? It all comes from a personal standpoint. Each person hears something. If it's like heavy metal with orchestra, that's going to elicit one emotional response from one person and a completely different emotional response from another person, just based on their own musical experience. So, I mean, it's completely different from person to person.
So you think it should be chosen by the game designer's personal favorite at the end of the day? Or should he go like, you know, go to a composer and say like, I don't know, you need to decide who makes the music here?
Oh, I think it depends. I mean, if you're talking about an audio director, usually they'll be the ones probably making the decision, or?
Yep.
No, I'm more
Right,
speaking
right.
about audio directors are musicians eventually, right? Like they
Most of the
usually,
time, yeah.
at least they know music really well. At the very,
In
very
theory, yeah.
least.
That's,
You'd hope.
So
But I don't know
no,
if
I'm
there's a
speaking
right
if you're not a musician at all, you're just an indie developer or a company without an audio director. And because this happens, they're getting contacting musicians, right? They see a few versions of things and they need to decide which one they're going with.
Yeah, well, in that case, if they're deciding probably without knowing themselves, they're probably going to look to references within, the industry of games that are like that genre. They're going to be like, oh, I listen to this, I really like this soundtrack. I like how this music works here. Probably they'll do their research and they'll do it based on probably experiences they've already had.
Yeah.
The shortfall of that is that they don't get to have that new experience. Like
Right.
Jason was talking about, like make it something that we've never heard before. They don't get that piece if they're doing it based on something they already know, unless they're quite adventurous or they already have a relationship with the composer. If they have a relationship with the composer, they probably will trust that composer to come up with something unique, and that's a great situation, I have to say.
Yeah.
that would be the best of both worlds for everybody, but of course it requires either a previous relationship between the audio director and the composer, or maybe the audio director knows of other titles that the composer's worked on and don't necessarily want the composer to do that title again, but they appreciated the aesthetic that the composer brought to that title and has said, hey, could you do something like that for our game? I mean, as the composer, and you're the composer and audio director, but I've never been able to hire myself, but I do appreciate, oh, no, no, that's not what I meant.
No, it's a great thing.
I appreciate being able to have a big level of trust, because that's really what it comes down to. What really opened my eyes when I was working on Tomb Raider with Alex Wilmer, he said that the biggest compliment I've ever gotten is he said that I made him look like he knew what he was talking about when they had meetings and he was talking about the music. Because it is the audio director is putting a lot of trust in the composer to basically make them look good and make them
totally.
hey guys, look, I know what I'm doing. I hired the right person and they're doing everything that we talked about and they're doing it really well. Because if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, if it's, the music direction changes, the game changes, it kind of all comes back and falls onto the audio director's shoulders, like, how come the music isn't working? And then you fall back to, well, maybe we should use some temp tracks and figure out something and get, this is like a BioShock game and Gary Scheinman did BioShock, let's hire Gary. And it falls to that would be an amazing choice.
Right.
But it falls to a safe creative choice because it's something that they've already done, as opposed to Gary's an amazing composer. He does all these different things. Let's hire Gary and see what he can come up with.
Yeah,
As
bring
opposed
to
to
the
trying to find someone to fit a mold that you've already predetermined. Get someone that you appreciate as an artist and let them help you build the mold.
Trust the artist, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Trust your composers, developers.
Yeah. Are you in here, developers?
All right, let's take questions from people here.
There's a microphone right up
That's a
there.
very lonely microphone.
Do you mind stepping up to it?
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Are we going right till 3?
Hey, this is really fascinating. Thank you. I would love some more general tips on adaptive music. I've been dabbling in it myself lately, and I don't know if it's because I am too close to it. It never feels right to me. Obviously, if you're writing music that's very bed-based, then it works better than if you're writing music that has some melodic elements or harmonic changes. So I guess, are there some general guidelines? Do you always try to have transitions locked to a beat or to a bar? Do you always... Yeah, does that work even if there are interruptions to melodic material, stuff like that?
I can do a quick, if I'm doing a 5-minute piece of music that's going to be all these different layers and stuff, most of the time I'll keep it all in the same key. So the whole thing's in D minor, which might sound amazingly boring, but that has already limited me to sort of the 1,000 different versions of things I could do in my head. Everything's tempo locked, everything's in the same key, maybe there's some meter changes, but I've got to program that all into Wise when I'm putting it in. But the idea is simplicity, less is more, and lots of randomization, at least for me. And I mess with the meter, and I also do the walk away test where I just hit play, and I'll go and, grab a bite to eat. I'll let it play and kind of hear it in the background as I'm walking around and kind of try to distance myself a little bit, because you get sick of it. You work on the same 2 minutes for a day, you hate it. And you have to be objective and try to then implement it as well. It's definitely tough.
I agree with the lock in a key or related keys
Yeah.
to different sections so that when you move from one thing to the next, it makes sense. And then I sometimes use custom cues, but they're at very specific points. And I also lock in tempo early because those types of things, when you do simplify, as Jason just said, to certain things that do not change, then you're going to make other things more easy in terms of transitions are the hardest part with adaptive music, right? You're branching off to something new. You don't know when it's going to happen. That's really interesting to think about, right? And compositionally interesting, too, I think.
Quick follow-up, just what's the shortest loop you've ever composed as a section? Because I think if anything, I go too long. So what's like the shortest?
Oh, yeah, well, I could say in mobile, they don't let you go long because it's all about space, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't do anything on music-wise.
Yeah, like if it's an adaptive context, if your exploration to battle, what's the shortest? Just as a
I did
guideline.
music for a game called Mark of Cree, which was one of the first sort of MIDI-based adaptive music things, and it was all a lot of percussion. So I had loops that were literally like 1/10 of a second because it was just a and I had it going
Wow. Cool.
and it was just that little tiny thing was looping.
Yeah.
I had 15 seconds. But I very much agree with what you said. Like at least when I'm working with adaptive, I spend, I don't know if most of the time, but a lot of time, perfecting the transitions. This is for me kind of the place where it's like, staying in the same key and the tempo. That's usually the case in adaptive, I think. But when stuff change, I want them to feel as natural as I can. So I usually spend a lot of time on that. So, going with stingers and things like that. And
Cool. Thank you so much.
thank you.
You were talking earlier about how the feeling of the music was trying to be condensed down into one word, and I noticed that all of your takes had very different ideas of what that scene seemed like. Some of them were empowering, others tense and dramatic, others chaotic. Do you think that if the audio director or the narrative game designer came up and said, hey, we want this scene to be empowering or chaotic, or they had one of these ideas, would that have made your music more similar to each other, or could it still have just been as varied?
So I think it's the one question I always ask a developer. Like this is, no matter, how long we've been working together, no matter anything, I always say that, like, give me the one or two words that, to dense it down to. I think it really helps musically. And yeah, personally, I think it would make it a lot closer, like the music, right? Because, being like epic, right? It's if that's the feeling that you want to do, then we will probably go in the general same direction. Like it wouldn't be as different as it is now. The core difference for mostly for I think good composers is when the bass is interpreted in a different way. You know what I mean? Like when you think like this needs to be sad or I don't know, lonely, which are two different things. And yeah.
Hi, thank you all. I was just curious if these videos would be available for download or educational kind of use.
Yeah, they're supposed to be in the GDC vault.
In the vault?
Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds good.
I think so. I hope I'm not lying.
Fastest
but,
answer ever.
Yeah. Good.
Hey, thank you guys very much. I have a question that's more about the collaborative process. So I know, Jason, you talked about like in the mix, you sometimes make the mix to sound, it can be tempting to make a mix that sounds full on its own without really knowing how the sound effects are going to play. And if it turns out that they actually kind of clash at the end of the day, how do you usually go about, remixing or iterating with the sound designer if it's a different person?
Usually by the time everything's kind of getting implemented and kind of finished, it's too late. So it's more either the music mixer or the audio director's shoulders to kind of carve things out with EQ normally, just to kind of make things sit better. And again, it's probably pretty dramatic EQ, where if you listen to the music by itself, it's like, where are all the lower mids? Like, how come there's no bottom end? Well, that's for explosions and footsteps or whatever. It's better when it's a back and forth thing, but it's not always the case. Sometimes it's just impossible. There's multiple composers, multiple people doing sound effects, multiple levels going on at the same time, depending on the scope of the game.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
I think we're out of time, so yeah. 1 minute. Yeah, yeah.
One
No,
more.
no,
One more.
One more.
We're getting a
Yay.
signal that you're good.
So I was just curious. It seemed like you scored these like, and I think contextually because of the dragon, it's probably implicit. There's something important happening there. But how might you have scored this video differently if it was definitely just like one of those emergent moments where you're like in an open world and you just sort of run across these things, and it's entirely possible the player might go through almost exactly the same fight like 5 minutes from now? How might, because these seemed like, you know, a big moment. How might you keep that intensity up with the full knowledge that that exact same music might play again or something very similar to it might play again?
I've done a lot of stuff like that where you're using a stinger to highlight the moment, and then when you're programming the music into the engine, you can, you know, duck the rest of the music, or you could even have, if it was something that may happen at least more than once, like it's going to happen 4 or 5 times, I would have 4 or 5 different stingers that would randomly and not repeatedly play and maybe duck the other music out, or also trigger a second layer that had like a pad or like a little choir or something that kind of emphasized the moment. But it would only do it that one time, and then it would trigger a different one a different time.
Just make sure it automatically varies.
Right, and
It's
I mean, the gameplay is going to be...
Yeah, repeating element that you know would be significant each time, then you can, you know, use that as a compositional element and a way to change your music.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.